Okay.
Mr.
Cool.
Chairman and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to address you on this issue. And some of my remarks today are going to perhaps complement and address some of the questions that were raised to members of the previous panel. But it's an issue that we believe to be critical to both the construction industry and to economic development and job creation across Canada, and that is the issue of delinquent payment in the construction industry, which is systemic, rampant, and more often the norm than the exception. My name is Jeff Kohler, and I'm the Executive Director of the Electrical Contractors Association of Ontario, which represents approximately 800 electrical contractors who employ 17,000 members of the IBEW. With me is our President, Dan Lancia, also the owner of an electrical contracting business, and Bill McKee, our former treasurer, long-serving board member and member of ECAO, and the owner of an Ottawa-based electrical contracting business that has some experience doing work for the federal government and its agencies. Collectively, ECAO is a member of the Canadian Electrical Contractors Association, which represents 8,000 electrical contractors across Canada, who in turn employ 70,000 licensed qualified electricians. CECA, in turn, is a member of the National Trade Contractors Coalition of Canada, whose primary purpose is to persuade the Canadian government to do the right thing in addressing the growing problem of delinquent payments to those in the construction industry. So the construction industry employs more than 1.2 million Canadians, representing 7.1% of the workforce, which in turn accounts for 6% of Canada's gross domestic product, which is worth about $73.8 billion. Construction is a primary driver of economic growth in Canada, and more than 80% of the construction is performed by trade contractors, such as the gentleman sitting with me and the people that they employ. Yet more often than not, trade contractors are made to wait several months to be paid for work that has been satisfactorily completed, while having to maintain their own weekly payroll obligations, as well as pay federal, provincial, municipal taxes, health and welfare benefit plan remittances, pension plan contributions, workmen's compensation remittances, and the myriad other bills and obligations that come with running a business. Construction trade employers, even though they account for more than 80% of all construction activity, are often subcontractors to a prime or general contractor who is hired by the project owner or developer, in this case the federal government and or its agencies. As such, they have payment terms and conditions imposed on them that they have little or no control over if they want the work. Historically, employment in construction has been more sensitive to the ups and downs of the economy. This is something that Dan Leduc alluded to previously. This held true in 2009 and 2010 following the recession, the downturn in the economy that started 2008 and carried through 2009. Employment decreased 1.6% overall, while employment in construction fell 5.7%. In 2010, when the economy saw signs of improvement, employment in all industries grew at a pace of 1.4%, while employment in construction advanced 4.9%. The point is, construction as a sector is an important driver of the economy. Our request is simple, that you endorse the legislation before you, Bill S-224, refer it back to the Senate floor for third reading and passage so that it may proceed to the House of Commons for debate and passage into law. This is a matter of fairness, of equity, of giving the trade contractors of Canada, who employ so many and contribute so much to the economy, a fighting chance to keep their businesses viable and solvent. You have examples right here in Ottawa of long-standing established businesses representing investments of life savings that have gone bankrupt because of delayed payments for satisfactorily completed work. And there was an article in the Ottawa Citizen, December 11, 2015, that chronicled some of the problems with the Lansdowne Centre. It was titled, "Lifting Lansdowne's Veil, Lawsuits Tell Story of Escalating Costs, Unpaid Bills, and Business Failure." This should not happen and would not happen if legislation existed to compel businesses to conduct themselves honorably and equitably, but not everybody does. That legislation is for another level of government where it affects the private sector. But the point is, the problem is continuing to grow and becoming worse. It's endemic in construction. It's not tolerated in any other industry. Delinquent payment in the construction industry starts at the top of the payment pyramid and has a huge ripple effect all the way down to the subcontractor at the bottom. This legislation before you affects only federal procurement projects where the federal government and its agencies and commissions are the developers or purchasers of construction. Unfortunately, federally procured construction projects are just as slow to pay as any private sector developer, particularly when third-party project management companies such as Brookfield Global are brought into play, and Mr. McKee can address any questions about that. You see a construction site with perhaps 300 workers on it, big sign for Elliston or PCL, and you assume that all 300 people work for that company. In reality, only a handful typically work on that construction site. The rest are subcontracts or trade contractors that are doing the actual work. You've got, electrical, you've got plumbing, you've got masonry, foundation, steel work. All of the sub-trades are employed by the general contractor to make that project a reality. Delinquent payment impacts the contractor's ability to grow his business by preventing him from hiring new employees or apprentices. It impacts investment in new machinery and equipment. It impacts the contractor's ability to bid work because his or her cash flow is stretched too thin. Critics of attempts to introduce prompt payment legislation in the past have suggested that such legislation would drive up the cost of construction, particularly in the public sector, when in fact the opposite is true. Late payment risk, and this is addressed previously as well, not prompt payment, is what drives up the cost of construction, as contractors have to factor that risk of late payment into their bids. And then shrinking the pool of eligible, qualified, reputable contractors drives up the cost of construction, not prompt payment. Ultimately, it impacts the solvency of businesses, of which we're seeing more frequently and in growing numbers. And a vast majority of jurisdictions in the developed world have prompt payment legislation in place for the construction industry, recognizing the value of its contribution in driving job creation and economic growth. The federal U.S. government, 49 U.S. states for public sector projects, 31 U.S. states for private sector construction, the United Kingdom, Republic of Ireland, countries in the European Union, New Zealand, all have prompt payment legislation in place, many of them for 10 or 20 years, some for as many as 30 years already. Why don't we? The principles of prompt payment are simple, and it's simply pay for certified completed work, not work in dispute, within approximately 1 month, not 3 months, 4 months, or longer. And attached to our written submission is an appendix, a letter from a contractor that's based in the Yukon that describes his attempts to collect payment on a federal project servicing remote border crossings for over a year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got Senator Day and Senator Weston. Anybody else? Senator Day.
Let me just deal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
That last point you made, Mr. Kohler, certified completed work. All of the contracts would make provision for someone, an engineer, architect, to come in and certify that the work has been completed.
Yes.
And that situation that you talked about at the end, that was certified completed work, but it still took over a year to get payment?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, we'd have to look at that. Why wouldn't they have done something before that? Something to prompt the payment if it's certified as having been completed, the work. I think